A mother's life was taken in Austin, Texas. The case could have been solved immediately, as her daughters discovered evidence and there was a DNA match. But the case would turn cold until the perpetrator phoned the police and confessed. On May 9, 2019, 65-year-old Gloria Lofton was found slain in her bedroom at her home, east of downtown Austin in Texas. An autopsy found evidence that she may have been strangled, but the cause and manner of demise were listed as undetermined. Relatives, who said that the authorities provided few details, came to believe an alcohol-related accident may have been to blame. Gloria's family would hear no news from the detectives and understood that the case went cold and would remain unsolvable. 4 years later, in May 2023, 63-year-old Raul Mesa Jr. phoned the Austin police and confessed to assaulting and ending Gloria's life. He also admitted to taking 80-year-old Jesse Fraga's life. Jesse was a retired probation officer who was Mesa's caregiver and roommate. In 1982, Mesa took the life of an 8-year-old girl, Kendra Page, and served about a decade in prison before he was released under laws at the time that gave him credit for good behavior behind bars. Mesa's early release from prison in 1993 caused an uproar throughout Texas, and he was met by protesters at nearly every turn. Picketers drove him out of 6 cities, sometimes with threats of violence. Mesa said the following during an August 1993 news conference after he had been driven out of the communities. "In my heart, I know that I will not willfully bring harm to anyone." In 2023, the Austin Police Department acknowledged that it did not act on key forensic evidence that could have linked Mesa to Gloria's demise 4 years earlier. Christina Foltz, Gloria's daughter, said that the authorities appear to have missed another important clue that provided an even more direct and immediate link to Mesa. She and her sister found a mysterious note at Gloria's home 6 days after her body was discovered. The note, which has not previously been reported, identified Mesa by name. The note read, "I, Gloria Elizabeth Lofton, give permission to Raul Mesa Jr. to request a certificate of authority on my behalf for the purpose of..." And then the note ends. Christina said that they found the note after the police had searched the house and that neither she nor her sister turned it over to them. She had forgotten about it and recently found images of the document while searching her phone for a video that she shot of Gloria's home. Christina said, "It was there in front of us this whole time, and who knows how many slayings may have been prevented had they looked around a little bit further and a little bit harder." Mesa claimed that he was promised 25% of an inheritance that would go to Gloria's nephew and that he would be compensated for the slaying. Gloria's daughters have said that Gloria did not have nephews. They said that it was unclear whether another family member may have promised Mesa money. In 2020, a DNA profile was made from an assault kit, and it did match to Mesa at the time. In a statement, Interim Austin Police Chief Robin Henderson said that the department was deeply sorry about the oversight linked to the DNA report. No explanation for the error was provided. On September 30th, 2024, Mesa pleaded guilty in a deal that allows him to serve life in prison and avoid capital punishment over the objections of the victim's family members. Mesa pleaded guilty to capital slaying in Gloria's end and to slaying Jesse. Mesa will not be eligible for parole. Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza said in a statement, "Our hearts continue to break for the Lofton and Fraga families. We hope this outcome continues to help them with their healing process." As a result of this outcome, Mr. Mesa will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole and will never threaten our community again. But the families of Mesa's victims wanted him to go to trial and for Attorney Garza to seek capital punishment. Gloria's daughter, Sonia Houston, said in a statement she read in court, "A lifetime in jail will not be equal to the pain the families have experienced. By accepting this plea, we are giving Raul exactly what he wants." In 1984, a man's life was ended after a fight with an intruder in Minnesota. DNA evidence would be stored, until the advanced technology was able to identify the perpetrator almost 4 decades later. In the early morning of July 17, 1984, the police responded to an apartment building on the 3200 block of Girard Avenue South in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after receiving multiple 911 calls. When the officers arrived, 2 women ran outside. A 33-year-old woman had a cut bleeding on the left side of her face. The second woman, 32 years old, was extremely distraught but uninjured. They told the police that an unknown man broke into their apartment and attacked them with a knife. Inside, the officers found Robert A. Miller's body lying in a pool of blood near a bedroom doorway. The officers observed blood on the kitchen floor, the back exit hallway, and the back exit doorknob as well. After tests, the outcome was that the blood did not match either victim. The investigators suspected that the perpetrator had cut himself during his knife attack. An autopsy later showed that Robert had been stabbed numerous times with wounds to his face, head, chest, back, and shoulders. No one was ever arrested or charged, and the case went cold. More than 3 decades later, in 2018, using the blood from the crime scene, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was able to develop a DNA profile. Unfortunately, there were no hits in the DNA database, as the perpetrator was not in the nationwide criminal system. The breakthrough would come 5 years later. In March 2023, genealogical research identified 2 likely suspects, 2 brothers. The police collected a bottle from one brother's trash in 2021, and after DNA testing, eliminated him as a suspect. Then they retrieved a discarded cup of the remaining suspect and made a DNA match. The investigators were able to track down the suspect, 67-year-old Matthew Brown, thanks to the advances in DNA technology. Brown, a father of 2, worked as a security counselor at the Minnesota Offender Program in Moose Lake and ran a motel in nearby Cloquet for years. Most recently, he lived in Ingleside, Illinois. Jim Miller, Robert's brother, said the following after he received the news of the suspect's arrest. "It was like the day it happened. I fell apart. I lost my voice." He added, "There were a couple of calls over a course of time where they thought they had a lead, but then they fell through. I think about my brother all the time, but I never thought they would ever crack the case." He knows people who knew Brown and had no idea his brother's perpetrator was so close. Brown was extradited back to Minnesota and held on $1 million bond. He admitted to following a woman to her apartment after a bar closed, cutting through a window to get inside, running into a man, and running home covered in blood, saying to himself, "What have I done?" The police said that he told them it weighed on him for decades, and he always prayed it was not real. Despite this, Brown agreed that the evidence against him proved his guilt. The Miller family agreed to a plea deal to avoid a trial. On September 18, 2024, Brown pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree slaying. He received credit for 457 days of time served. Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, lead investigator with the Minneapolis Police Department, said, "It feels good to finally bring a case together and give the family some sense of justice." David Miller, Robert's nephew, said, "It is hard for me to understand the mind of a person who carries a knife around with bad intentions. It is just hard for us to imagine. It has been hard on the family." Reflecting on the sentencing, Jim acknowledged that Brown could be released when he is 80 years old, but said, "That is fine. He will be an old man then." A young woman's life was cruelly taken in 1981 in Ohio. The perpetrator would be an immediate possible suspect, but he lied during his interview and walked free for 4 decades. The police would track him down through new DNA technology that was not available at the time, but then he would be arrested for a different crime, and then, suddenly, the case would be solved. On April 29, 1981, 18-year-old Deborah Lee Miller was beaten to her end with pots and pans and an oven grate in her apartment on West 3rd Street in Mansfield, Ohio. She was survived by 8 brothers and sisters and her parents, Shelva Jean Miller of Mansfield and Leroy Dale of California. She was due to graduate from high school in June 1981 and had been working part-time as a waitress at the local Mr. T's coffee shop. Deborah was one of several people from the Mansfield area whose suspicious demise in the 1980s were examined for possible links to Mansfield police officers. A special investigation ordered by the mayor concluded in 1989 that there was no evidence that linked any officers with the demises. Although, the report raised questions about involvement between police officers and slaying victim Deborah, and about the way the police investigated some slayings. The report noted that Deborah wrote in her diary that she was involved with several Mansfield police officers. The local police chief retired in January 1990 after subsequent complaints arose over alleged irregularities in the investigation of the passing of the ex-wife of a Mansfield patrolman. Deborah's case was reopened several times during the ensuing years, but without accurate DNA technology, the case would turn cold every time. Finally, 40 years after the crime, the case was reopened to account for advances in DNA technology and forensic investigative techniques. Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bauman said, "They examined the case as if it had happened yesterday, through an entirely new lens. Their findings were staggering." The chief said that a firm DNA profile of James Vanest, at the time Deborah's 26-year-old upstairs neighbor, emerged from evidence left from the room. Vanest had been questioned back in 1981, but was never identified as a prime suspect during the initial investigation, which became mired in allegations of the potential police misconduct. This time, Richland County prosecutor Jody Schumacher said that the DNA evidence against Vanest was strong enough that her office was preparing a case against him for the slaying to take to a grand jury. In November 2021, the police had found Vanest living in Canton, Ohio, about 100 miles east of Mansfield, and re-interviewed him. He had admitted to lying to investigators during his first interview in 1981, and the investigators sensed this time that he was trying to create an alibi to account for his DNA being present in Deborah's apartment. Vanest was trying to claim that he had previously been in Deborah's apartment as a way of explaining the presence of his DNA, even though the police had not revealed their DNA findings to him. Mansfield Police Detective Terry Butler sought a second interview in spring 2024, but Vanest refused to speak and requested an attorney. The authorities said that he subsequently sold his house in Canton, bought a pickup truck and trailer, and fled to West Virginia. He left several firearms at his Canton home and was stopped in West Virginia with 2 more. He was arrested on state charges and released on bond. The Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives took over his case and later indicted him on the federal gun charges. On November 18, 2024, U.S. Marshals and Canton's SWAT team attempted to serve Vanest with that indictment at a hotel where he was holed up. Chief Bauman said, "It is our understanding that when confronted by marshals and the Canton Regional SWAT team, Mr. Vanest pointed a gun at them and barricaded himself inside the hotel. After a short shootout, one Canton SWAT member was shot in the arm and Mr. Vanest was fatally shot." The officer who was shot, Patrick Lewis with the North Canton Police Department, said the following after the incident. "After about 30 seconds to a minute of trying to find him, I heard a gunshot and felt instant pain in my right arm. The situation was so chaotic. There was still gunfire, so when I saw the bleeding coming from my arm, I knew I had to get a tourniquet on." The chief said that the department considers the 43-year-old cold case as closed and hopes identifying Deborah's perpetrator will bring her family some closure. Detective Butler said that his great-uncle was one of the first officers on the crime scene of Deborah. He said that he feels fortunate to get the chance to solve a slaying case that happened when he was just 10 years old. "People should know," he said. "We do not give up. We keep digging." Chief Bauman said the following at the press conference on December 30th. "As law enforcement officers, you always want to see the handcuffs on the bad guy. That is what we do for a living. But I can tell you, seeing the family with a little bit of relief and closure certainly supersedes our need." He added that Deborah's family is grateful that this case has finally been resolved. A confinement officer who owned a Subway store in Indiana in 1998 would lose his life in his store. DNA technology, jail interviews, and jail phone recordings would lead to a serial perpetrator 2 decades later. On April 23, 1998, at a Subway store in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a man walked into the store, pointed a gun at a woman, and began yelling, asking if anyone else was in the store. She then told him that the owner, Daniel Osborn, was in the back, and then the man went to find him. Daniel, an Allen County Jail confinement officer, was in his Allen County Sheriff's Department uniform and on the phone with his wife, who is the co-owner of the Subway store. The man demanded that Daniel get off the phone and then shot him before demanding money from the cash register and safe. After he got the money, he bound the woman's hands with duct tape. He spoke to her once again and left immediately after. He said, "You better call the 50 for him, he needs help." 47-year-old Daniel unfortunately passed away. When the detectives reached the crime scene, they collected evidence and fingerprints, but unfortunately the case went cold. After 2 decades, the case was reopened and they found a DNA match to a suspect. Cold case detective Brian Martin then interviewed individuals at the Department of Corrections. They shared some information that they had gained from 48-year-old Bernard McClaney that ultimately led to his arrest. Detective Martin said, "We were able to get Bernard McClaney to give very vital key pieces of this crime to us that only somebody who had intimate knowledge would know." McClaney's phone calls from Pendleton were monitored. In one phone interview, McClaney told his sister that he was conflicted for telling on himself and that he was afraid he made a mistake in doing so. McClaney told his sister, "I feel that there is a lot of inside information going on, like they know what is going on, like they know I ended the life of the officer or something. I do not know if it is me being paranoid or whatever it be." In another phone call, McClaney's sister tells him she wants him to be at peace, but he replied that he is very conflicted. "It was wrong, them things I done. The motive was robbery, and I am very sorry for it." Shell casings found at the scene were consistent with a .380 caliber weapon McClaney used in a different case. Daniel's life was taken in between 2 other slayings McClaney have admitted guilt in. He previously confessed to ending the life of 22-year-old Kemrick Drake on April 27th in Columbus, Ohio, and 19-year-old Artie Rittenhouse on April 1st in Fort Wayne, both in 1998. McClaney pleaded guilty to aggravated robbery and voluntary manslaughter in the case involving Kemrick more than 2 decades ago. He has served his sentence in that case. McClaney pleaded guilty to slaying in Artie's demise in 2013 and was sentenced to 55 years in prison for the crime. Court records show that he was recommended for a maximum security facility. More than a dozen members of the Allen County Sheriff's Department were in the courtroom during sentencing to support Daniel's family. On August 9th, 2024, McClaney accepted a plea deal, then pleaded guilty, and on August 22nd, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Detective Martin believes that McClaney got a fright when he saw Daniel with his confinement officer uniform on, and that is why he started shooting. Martin called it possibly an armed robbery gone wrong. McClaney apologized to his victim's family during the hearing. He said, "Just know that he is up in heaven. He was a good guy. He is up in heaven. He is looking down on you." The defendant said that he hopes Daniel's family can someday forgive him, but he understands if that is not possible. "I do not forgive myself." Allen County Prosecutor's Office Chief Counsel Tisa Helga, who was assigned to the case, said she was happy to see Daniel's family get some closure with the plea agreement and sentence. She said, "A lot of time in slaying cases, we do not get the offender saying, 'I am really sorry, I regret this, I have suffered with this,' but we did hear that this morning." Chris Cuffle, Daniel's eldest daughter, and Emily her best, his eldest granddaughter, spoke on behalf of the family at the hearing. each representing a generation impacted by his demise. They said that they were glad McClaney accepted the plea offer so that they could avoid a lengthy trial. Chris, describing her father as kind, loving, and a protector, said, "To know him was to love him. In the more than 20 years since Daniel's life ended, he has missed out on major life events and playing a role in his loved ones' lives." In court, Chris said, "Mr. McClaney not only robbed our family's subway, but robbed so many loved ones of a father, husband, grandfather, brother, and friend." Emily said that she wishes she had memories of her grandfather, but unfortunately, all she has are stories she has heard. She said, "Hearing all my life how involved he was as a grandpa and how much he loved us, I know he would have adored his other granddaughters and great-granddaughters." With children of her own, Emily said that she takes her 5- and 3-year-old daughters to visit their great-grandfather's grave. She has had to explain to them why their great-grandpa is in the ground, what bad guys are, and what demise is. She said, "I now sympathize with my aunt and my mom when they had to explain to my cousin and I at such a young age what heaven was." A woman would lose her life due to strangulation in Massachusetts. Forensic genetic genealogy brought the breakthrough after almost 2 decades. In October 2005, 42-year-old mother of 4, Suzanna Alvarado's body was found on the side of Route 88 in Westport, Massachusetts. An autopsy was performed where it was determined that Suzanna, a resident of nearby New Bedford, had been beaten and strangled. Her demise was ruled as a slaying. She had a final encounter with law enforcement on October 14th, when she was arrested by New Bedford police on a charge of public drunkenness and prostitution. Her husband, Alex Sanchez Alvarado, said, "That is not the full story of her. She was not just some prostitute. She was a good person with problems, you know? Yeah, she had a record. She liked illegal substances. It was an escape. But one thing about her, she was not phony." Relatives quoted in that story noted that she had suffered physical abuse as a child. Evidence from the crime scene was collected, and an STR profile was developed using traditional DNA testing. This profile was entered into CODIS, but there was no match to a known individual. The person responsible for ending Suzanna's life was not known, and despite the detectives following up on all available leads, the case went cold. In 2020, 15 years after the crime took place, the Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Case Unit performed a forensic review of the case in hopes that advances in forensic DNA testing could assist in the identification of the person responsible. In 2022, the Bristol County District Attorney's Office and Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Case Unit teamed with Otherum to determine if advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy could help generate new leads. The Bristol District Attorney's Office secured funding from Season of Justice and submitted evidence to Otherum. Otherum provided new investigative leads to law enforcement, and a follow-up investigation was conducted. This led investigators to potential relatives of the suspect, a man who left DNA evidence at the crime scene in 2005. After nearly 2 decades, on December 18, 2024, 62-year-old Simão Farias was arrested and arraigned. He is being held without bail, and Suzanna's family is waiting for justice to be served.